What do you call a detective from the Reformation? Give up, Martin Sluther. All right, I know none of you guessed it, so let's keep going. 1968, a tumultuous year. And quite a year it was. Key concepts. Why is the Tet Offensive a loss for the U.S.? What does it say about the changing role of media during wars? And why is this the signature event for the credibility gap? Next, what failure is experienced in Chicago and how does it impact the election of 68? Who is Richard Nixon and what's his role in the Vietnam War? Who is the silent majority and why are so many angered at the counterculture movement? And then what is Westmoreland's strategy for the Vietnam War? Key vocab, lots of them here. 2 slides. Look out! Feminism, Roe v. Wade, counterculture, Civil Rights Act of 68, already mentioned credibility gap and the Tet Offensive, Nixon, silent majority, and My Lai. So 1968 is a crazy year, and there's a lot that's going on. So let's get right to it. In the civil rights arena, one of the big things that's passed that year is the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This is supposed to end discrimination in housing. In the end, it's another action taken by the federal government that's trying to crack down on poverty, trying to crack down on discrimination and racism. But there is one huge event that took place in 1968, more of a happening than an event, and that is the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in May of that year. This rocked the nation for sure, and it led to a bunch of riots, even though Martin Luther King was a promoter of nonviolence. With that said, the riots were a short-term thing, and the nonviolent movement was able to continue moving forward, and that had to do a lot with who Martin Luther was as a leader, and then also the leadership that was that had followed him for a large number of years, so on and so forth. The civil rights movement also needs to be attributed to many of the other minority movements that were happening at the time. The first movement we'll take a look at will be the women's rights movement. This movement is branded feminism, and really they're still just about equal rights and seeking equality with men. They want things like equal pay. They want to be understood that they shouldn't be expected to stay inside the home, be a stay-at-home mom, be a stay-at-home wife, that they can go out and do what men do. Just the same, whether it be from an occupational standpoint or a sexual standpoint. We get the creation of the group called NOW, National Organization of Women. And then maybe the greatest accomplishment of the movement at the time takes place further down the road in 1972 with the decision on Roe v. Wade, which does allow women to have abortions. The next movement we'll take a look at is the American Indian Movement, or AIM. And AIM was created initially to combat police brutality, which is something we've already seen in the African American community and discussed in the African American community. Their battle has, of course, been very long, and we see 3 court victories in the 70s and 2 more in the 1980s that have to do with land, things of that nature. But of course, there's still a long fight ahead, even today, for many American Indians, at least how they see it. The next movement we'll discuss is the Latino movement that is underway, and this one revolves around a very diverse group that is growing rapidly in the United States and is still growing very rapidly today. One of the leaders at the time, Cesar Chavez, he's one who is focusing on farmers and the conditions that they're in, the lack of pay, the lack of benefits that they are receiving, and he wants to improve those conditions that they face. Finally, I like to include the gay movement that is happening at this time, or at least that's getting underway. And we see this is a group that has been very quiet and is unknowingly to most Americans going under a lot of scrutiny because of a lack of public knowledge regarding gays. And the Stonewall riots are probably the turning point for this movement where we're going to start to see gays be much more outspoken on what they're facing, who they are, acceptance, and uh, not having to deal with ill treatment imposed on upon them by others. It's one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that all these movements are not movements that have just gotten started because of the civil rights movement or have had no history before the civil rights movement. Rather, they're really gaining steam during this time, even though they have been fought for in the past. One of the groups in the 1960s that takes a very freedom, pro rights, equal rights, anti war stance is going to be anybody participating in the counterculture movement. And we most often associate the counterculture movement with hippies as far as some of their characteristics. They're going to be comprised of college students. They're going to be comprised of college dropouts. They're going to listen to rock and roll music. Um, Musicians are very much going to be attached to the livelihood that comes out of counterculture. Woodstock is going to be a creation of counterculture and has continued for a number of years. The idea that everybody feels that they have a sexual license to be with as many partners they wish to be with. Uh, Drug use is going to become very popular at this time. Cocaine is going to be a new experimental drug that is out on the market. Let's move on to the Vietnam War in 1968. And before we get specific to that year, let's talk about the strategy by the United States put together by General Westmoreland. And his strategy is a war of attrition. And there's two goals with this. And number one, it's to destroy the morale of the enemy. If you can do that, then you have a better chance at winning. And then number two, you gradually wear down the enemy. So those are the two main goals. But this is a problematic strategy, and we're going to see why it fails right here. It fails for multiple reasons, and first of all, it ends up not destroying their morale. Let me give you an example. When you have bombers fly overhead, and U.S. bombers fly overhead, and you run and hide, they bomb, the United States bombs, and then people end up surviving, it actually increases their confidence. And when this happens over and over and over, and you continue to survive, then it's not destroying any morale. It just is making you realize you're able to survive longer against maybe the most powerful military in the world at the time. Okay, number two, a longer war is worse for the United States. The United States is having lots of trouble at home, as you've already seen, and there's a debate whether or not we should even be in this war and why we're in this war. So, for those reasons, it makes a lot more sense to have a short, quicker war as opposed to a war where it's going to take time. And then finally, the local support is going to be hurt. Um, the longer the United States is there. And we'll take a look at an example that does that a little bit later on in this lecture. Now let's address a specific event from 1968, and it happens in January and goes for almost a month. But that is the Tet Offensive. Tet Offensive. Okay, and that offensive is very unique for the United States, or for the Viet Cong rather, against the United States. Guerrilla warfare is a defensive tactic. However, the Viet Cong in South Vietnam, they decide to go on the offensive. They create a coordinated attack on all the major cities in South Vietnam. And you can see all the attack points on the map on the right side of the screen. This offensive is easily a military victory for the United States. They're caught off guard a little bit, they retreat somewhat, and then they're able to repel the attack in every city after about 3 to 4 weeks. The problem for the United States is going to be psychologically, this is a defeat. Okay? And a lot of that has to do with media coverage. Media coverage is something that is exceptionally new to the Vietnam War, and media has never covered a war like it covers the Vietnam War.